Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, we're broadcasting to planet Earth, people. So here we go. Let's remove that. So, folks, welcome everybody. We've got a few in the house, as I think we're supposed to say on these occasions already. So we'll say hello to you in a while. We have a guest panelist today, as you can see, who's Dr. Corey Lee Wrenn. So we'll say hello to you. Oh, who's doing that? We've got an echo. We have a guest panelist today, as you can see. Has somebody got YouTube on? Anybody got YouTube
Not
on?
me.
Who's doing that? We've got an echo. Well,
Oh, that's spooky, isn't it?
Help! What's going on here? Let me see. I'm sure it's not me.
Spooky, isn't it?
No. Help! So, somebody must have YouTube on as well as StreamYard.
No, and it's not me because I've muted.
As well as StreamYard. Okay, folks.
It's not me.
Confession time. It was me.
Oh,
I knew it.
After all that.
I knew it as well.
Yeah.
We knew it, didn't we?
I have YouTube on because I got the job of doing the intro, and I don't normally do it, and so right. So yes, normal service back again. So Corey Lee Wrenn, our guest panelist, is a feminist, vegan, and sociologist specializing in human, non-human studies or human-animal relations, the sociology of the animal rights movement, ecofeminism, and vegan studies. She is currently a lecturer in the School of Social Policy, Sociology and Social Research at the University of Kent. So welcome, Corey. I'm sorry that I rather fecked up your intro there, but
It's always really smooth on this show, Corey. So you're in good hands.
Yeah,
don't worry.
You're in good hands. You're in good hands. You got no problem. Yeah.
So should we say
Right.
just see who's here before we hand over to Nella? So we've got Vegmet Cobboard here, and Deb's here, and Benny, and we have Michael, Amber. Who else have we got down here? We have Ronnie's here, and Anne. Vegan education on the go. So welcome everyone, and do say hello if you haven't already. Oh, Jeremy's here as well. Sorry, Jeremy. Jeremy the ape.
The ape has arrived.
The ape is here.
Right. So before we get into the main part, if you like, of the show, Nella, you've been really caught up with these terrible events with all the fires around mainland Europe, particularly Greece, obviously. So you want to say a few things about it, because it's been quite a hectic week for you, isn't it?
It was an inferno, and as you probably know, Greece, Italy, Turkey are on fire. We have fires raging all over the country. Most of them for days were not uncontrolled for days. I just wanted to mention all the non-human animals that died in these fires, and there are thousands of them. They're still dying by the thousands, and for most people don't even count as victims. The environmental disaster is colossal, and at this point the burnt part of Greece is larger than the non-burnt part. And I just want to say thank you and to all these volunteers, animal rights activists, vegans, non-vegans that are out there trying to rescue lives. And in many cases, they manage to, even risking their own lives. And that's why some other animals were spared.
It's been a bad time. Of course, one thing that really got to you was the fact that sometimes the news would report that there's been no casualties, and of course usual thing, isn't it? You know,
that was the case for days until some of us became really angry with that, and then there was this hashtag that we mourn victims, because if at that point we didn't have any human victims, now they're unfortunately free, but the free living beings and even companion animals that we are chained in backyards and left there when humans were fleeing their homes are thousands.
I find it difficult to imagine that. I mean, it's bad enough having a dog, for example, tied up in a backyard, but to actually not let them loose before you go, that's kind of unthinkable. It's an unspeakable act of.
It is, and it's like the two sides of a coin. You had people grabbing only the cats and the dogs from their house and nothing else, and then you had the people that they would grab their valuables while leaving their companion animals behind. It's horrendous.
Yes, despicable. Yes. Despicable. One story that really struck me, Nella, that you told us the other day was, I think it was a couple or a family who they cared for 3 dogs and a horse, and they were on a beach and they were about to embark on a boat to kind of flee one part of the island to get somewhere to safety. And the people organising the rescue had said that you can bring the dogs, but you can't bring the horse, and so they decided to stay.
A couple of 3 dogs and a horse. They could not escape by land, so they were waiting for ship and boats. And when authorities informed them that they cannot take the horse with them, they decided to stay there. For 24 hours, we didn't know if they had made it, but good news is that they did. They managed to walk a huge distance, and at some point they got to safety. But
of course, what
I was thinking of all these moral dilemmas the movement loves so much, and at that moment I thought that they answered the dilemma, the boat and the human and the dog. You don't throw anyone off the boat.
You don't throw anyone off the boat. And actually, speaking of boats, one thing that came to me is that in a vegan world, that wouldn't even arise. You would make provisions to rescue whoever needed rescuing, not just humans, because it seems like we make all these provisions to rescue humans, and then the other animals are just kind of on the periphery, and if we can, it's a kind of last resort or last thought. But of course, in a vegan world, that wouldn't be the case. We would have provisions in these situations.
No. The good news is...
And Brian's here, so that always makes everything better.
Hello, Brian. If they qualify as good news, is that because there have been fires in Greece before, not that large, but it happens every summer, more now with climate change, that more people really care about other animals. The number of people that went out during the night to rescue whoever they could, it's much larger this year.
There was one thing that you said. I think you were telling us about this, just before we came on, in a way, because you'd said on our kind of private chat that arson was suspected, but then arson seems to have joined in with climate change to kind of make everything worse. But
yes,
I mean,
they have made
I don't know whether you've read if there is such a thing as the sociology of arson, but I mean, like, why would anybody do that? In a heat wave, they would actually deliberately set a fire. And so I was thinking, are we talking about an accident here? But you were saying people have been arrested, right?
Yes,
Nella?
yes.
Amazing.
5 or 6 people in different areas of the country. We have to wait and see if they're really responsible for that. But nothing. No fire could be so strong, so powerful without the heat wave and the climate change. And still many people deny that climate change is real.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Amazing, isn't it? Well, after that, you did send us a video of some sheep in a car. being rescued from the fires. So that was I mean, it's interesting that, you know, you always get those kind of acts of whatever you want to call it, you know, kindness, justice, you know. But I suppose you'll never know how many. I know one of your friends said that they went looking for other animals, and they found large areas unoccupied, and they were just hoping that maybe they got away because they didn't find lots of dead ones, right? So
because as you can imagine, vegans were looking also for the so-called farmed animals, and they were trying to rescue them because no one else. I mean, they do, even firefighters do. But the thing is that if you rescue them from fire, you have to also rescue them from slaughter. So they were trying to make sure that they are rescued and then sent somewhere that were not in danger. And in many cases, they managed to do that. And at some point, we'll play that video. It's I'm really proud to know that young woman. She's been amazing these last few days, and during the night she managed to put 6 sheep in her very small car and carry them to safety. And I still don't know how she managed to lift these heavy animals and put them in the car, but she was so dedicated to what she was doing. When she left her house that night, she said, no, there will be no victims while I'm out there. I will leave no one behind. And she actually did.
That's great. Yeah, well done. And thank you to you, Nella, as well, for everything that you did and your part in it as well.
I didn't do anything much. I did some research and rescue. We didn't do any rescue because we climbed the whole hillside and we didn't see anyone alive other than a few bags, just corpses.
So Corey, have you been following this story at all?
No, I'm afraid I've not. I've been in a bit of a hole the past few days, so this is all new to me. I saw it on the news just this morning, but no, shame on me. No, I haven't. No, I've not been watching the news.
Ah, well, it's not that. It's more to do. I mean, at the scale of it, it's just
Yeah.
getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I suppose, really. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, in terms of the human capacity to kind of ignore, because everybody's going to be focusing on the premiership starting or something, in the countries where it's not affected. It's really weird. We never take this idea of the global village seriously, it seems to me. So it's a real shame. Anyway, I suppose we should move on. So welcome, Corey, again. And we're going to look through. Well, first of all, we're going to start off with your newest book. So this was out. Another one. That's two copies sold.
I love the covers of your books, Corey. Your covers are always really bright and colourful. They're so. Well,
this is the only one I actually drew myself. The last one, there's a woman, Linda Bell, in New Zealand, who's a vegan artist, and I bought that painting, a copy of it, to put on the cover because all vegans love that woman's art. Oh, she's just amazing. But I did this one. Hence a little
amazing, really vibrant, and colourful. I love it.
Thank you.
And what's the medium pencil then? Yeah,
it's colored pencil. I mean, it's okay. It looks a lot better than the original, but it is what it is.
Yeah. So are you happy with the finished product? I know it's getting some attention, isn't it? You were on the museum. What is it called? The Little
Museum of Dublin. It's actually a weird coincidence because there's a woman who one of the reasons I wrote this book is no one had really done any animal rights vegan research in Ireland, like big scale stuff. And right as my book was publishing, another woman had just published a book on animals in society in Dublin in the 1800s. And they had her on the show. So I came on the show, which so inspired the director of the museum that he wants to do his own book on this. And he put out a call. He says, I want to do so many stories about different animals in the Dublin Zoo or whatever. And I emailed him and I said, don't you know what goes on at the zoo, man? Oh my goodness, it's awful. And I've documented some of that in my book. And so that's how it actually came about. So he was very kind to bring me onto the show to give an alternate, a little bit more critical perspective on
I think that interview with you now and another academic, and nobody, even people on the show, could really pronounce his name properly, sadly. But that's all on YouTube now, and it is really interesting because the contrast between you and your language and the other person was really remarkable.
Right. But to be fair, for people who, I mean, obviously people wouldn't have seen it, but he's a Irish food historian and a butcher and a chef, not vegan at all. But to be fair, I thought he was extremely considerate and kind of what I mean. This is as radical as it gets. I'm almost embarrassed to let my friends and family read it because it's just like dripping with like super radical feminist Marxist stuff. So for that guy to be so welcoming and kind about it, I thought that was very good of him.
Yeah,
I have a question. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Roger.
I was just going to say we're going to come back to the Marxism bit. I've got a question about that. But Nella, carry on.
Yes. Just to clarify something about the title. Although the book is specific about Ireland, doesn't mean that people have to really have an interest on Ireland to read the book, because the whole analysis in the book, colonialism and other kinds of oppression, apply to many other countries. So if you don't have a special interest on Ireland, it doesn't mean that the book is not extremely useful to you.
Right. Now, I thought that was a bit of a risk to do this because it really honestly came out of my love of, at the time I was living in Cork, and I was invited to write a chapter, an encyclopedia chapter, and the encyclopedia never came to fruition. But in researching for that, I realized, gosh, there's like nothing on this. There's nothing on this. I think, Roger, you had 1 or 2 articles and that was it. It's like nobody else had done anything from a vegan, anti-speciesist perspective. But although it is about Irish, and it's dripping Irish history and culture, it's kind of part of, I would say, a recent turn in animal studies where this kind of colonial, anti-colonial, or critical of colonialism perspective that's happening. Because there's a few books that have popped up about India and Africa and so on and so forth, but not necessarily from such a critical vegan perspective. But it's a recent turn, which I find very, very fascinating. Which, by the way, I have to give credit where credit is due. A lot of the research, or a lot of the theory, is based on the work of Af, who's been a huge, huge, huge influence on me. Af started writing with me, back in 2013 or something like that. We met each other through feminist blogging, and then she started blogging with me on Vegan Feminist Network. And the stuff that she comes out with, I'm assuming a lot of people listening to this will know who Af is, but if you don't, you simply must check her out. What a genius that woman is. But she was pushing this idea of this notion of really this concept of animalization being tied into the process of colonialization. And so where better to start than Ireland, the very first colony of Britain?
Yeah, we're very proud of it. Just to some extent, it's interesting because as Nella said, it's kind of, the book covers a wider scope than it's kind of that focus of scope in a way, but you kind of situate Ireland kind of geographically, but also morally and in terms of the movement in between North America and Britain, right? So it's a wide interest in that sense.
Right.
Before we move on, you mentioned language already. I wanted, just as a general point, to ask you about, you always use the term non-human animal rights movement. And there's not many people, some do, but not many people who use that term. So is there a reason, we struggle in the movement to get people to not just say animals, humans and animals. So where did that come from? Was it an evolution of ideas, or?
I can't say that I'm 100% on any of the words I use about that, because I think, like myself, like you, David Nybert as well, we've kind of fumbled with this language. To use non-human animals still centers humans, right? But one of the things I do, and is it actually done in this book, but one of the things I've been fighting editors for a few years now is to actually capitalize non-human animals. Is, you know, like when I'm writing about race, human race, I won't capitalize white, but I'll capitalize black. And so that's what I started doing with non-human animals, and editors hate that. But it's a political gesture to do that, and it's just like one small thing, because the language is never going to be perfect. But what do you call it, Roger, if you don't call it the non-human animal rights movement? Some people use an acronym, which I find annoying. I don't like acronyms.
Well, obviously, there's a famous one from Cthulhu, isn't there? You know, the kind of what is it? Other animals. Oh, I can't even remember it now. So it's because like
other than human.
Yeah.
Other than human.
But still centering human.
Yeah,
that's right.
It does.
There's no perfect. I just have to pick one and go with it. That's all I can say. There's not too much bullshit on it.
Well, I mean, we often say other animals. Jeremy the Ape in the chat talks about fellow animals, and that's the language you use.
Oh, that's a good one. I actually never heard that one before.
Yeah,
I think it comes from the actual book, isn't it? Is it Christine? Is it Karsgaard, or I can't remember the name exactly?
Yes,
I think it's from that book, Our Fellow Animals. Yeah.
But I've seen that phrase in Henry Salt's work actually as well. So there you go. So
really,
they were all breaking boundaries in those times, because I mean, in those days, people were referring to other animals as beasts,
brutes, and
you know, lower animals and this kind of stuff, and all that, the hierarchical stuff. Anyway, so
since you mentioned the vegan feminist network, I think this is a page everyone should check. The articles there are amazing and about a multitude of topics. So there is really great content in that page. Highly recommended.
Yeah, and that's not the Corey Wrenn show. That I created that website back in 2013, because back then, oh gosh, it's like, now we kind of take it for granted, but back then we had, when you talk about feminism, everybody says Carol Adams. Well, Carol Adams didn't at that time have a major web presence, and she was writing books that would go into university libraries. But we'd entered a new wave of internet culture and activist culture. So there was a lot of young women and non-binary people, trans folk, who were writing these things and not getting platform, not getting a place to speak. And so that's basically where it was coming from. So I created that website so everybody could do. And like, now that I'm a full-time academic, I don't have time to blog very much at all, but still get people who submit stuff, who don't get platform elsewhere. And that's the joy I find in it, is giving people a space to write who don't get to speak anywhere else.
And I hope we might come back a little bit to some of the vegan feminism if we get time, after we've spoke about Corey's book as well.
Yes. Well, I kind of slung this PowerPoint together this morning, really, as a bit of an intro, in the sense that apart from ideas about our relations with other animals, you've also got, it's a kind of history book as well, in a sense. And so we'll just kind of probably just shoot through this kind of timeline that you provided in the book, just maybe take a little bit out of it. We're not going to talk about it particularly much, but it's quite interesting in the sense that I mean, Irish people in the end have played a really big role in our movement, haven't they?
Huge, and not celebrated at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was involved with the BYV, and of course you got is it Frances Power Cobb? Is that the right?
Yeah. Power's the
She
right
was
word.
a big player in the anti-vivisection movement, wasn't she?
Yeah, she wasn't vegetarian.
Yeah.
She was actually anti-vegetarian, but the work that woman put in to fight that, her whole life fighting vivisection at a time when this was happening, and that was a time where she could have turned the tide. But unfortunately, and actually I think it's very interesting about her is because this abolitionist welfare debate that we've been dealing with for the past 20, 30 years actually goes all the way back to her time. And that was when I learned about her and her history, it's one of the most powerful things, is actually they called themselves abolitionists.
Yeah.
What happened? She got this law passed because vivisection was taking off. Of course, there's a lot of class politics to it, because now you have people who didn't come from money, who could get into the middle classes and become a doctor and become powerful. And it was and she was, of course, from the She was for money. But the point was is that this is a new thing that was happening. It was happening right in front of her, and then she was able to dedicate all this work to it. And then they created these organizations. It's okay, well, let's regulate it. We'll put a law. What they hoped that act would do was put so much red tape that would make it very difficult for people. At the time, I mean, anybody could just go do anything they wanted to animals in the name of science. So that was their idea. We'll make it difficult to do it. Unfortunately, what happened is when that act passed, it basically gave a green light and said, well, we're meeting the stipulations. We've got the regulations in law and and it just streamlined vivisection. And so after that point, she was like, no more of this. I'm abolitionist 100%. We're getting rid of it completely. We're not trying to regulate it. And that alienated her from a lot of people. So she ended up starting a whole new organization, which is still around today. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting issue, though, because, I mean, I think really the BOAV came from the NAVs. So it was a kind of, it was a kind of, well, this is all reformism. And so really, I suppose she really kind of was one of the first articulations of abolitionism within our movement.
They literally called themselves abolitionists. Yeah.
And so then you ended up with the British Union for the Abolition of Vivisection. And, Ronnie in the chat will know a lot about that, having kind of camped there for a while. I was on the executive committee in the early 80s there. And then suddenly, again, a movement thing, and, you know all about this, Corey, that as they kind of like think about their jobs and they think about their claims making, they start to think, oh, maybe our stuff is a bit too radical. So they started to move away. So one of their slogans was against all animal experiments. So they changed that to against animal experiments. And then they just got rid of the name abolition completely by changing the name to, was it Cruelty-Free International?
Cruelty-Free International.
Some beige stuff. Yeah.
Which is almost on the par with Mercy for Animals as a bad name, I think.
Well, now Compassion Over Killing has recently changed their name to Animal Outlook.
Right, okay. Well, you've written a lot about that particular group because it was kind of anarchic, that group at one point, wasn't it? And then...
A what? What were they?
When you say it was anarchic, I mean, certainly it was very kind of
anarchic. Okay. So
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, that's one of my favorite examples is because they started out as a student group in DC, super, super radical. They would put on the front of their newsletter, which was hand typed, and you could tell it did it in a copy machine themselves, and it was called The Abolitionist. And they would proudly display on the cover of this pictures of them getting arrested by the police. And they'd have an insert in the middle, in the beginning of it, with saying that we are against it all. We don't want to reform it. We don't want to make the cages bigger. We want to empty the cages, all that stuff. And then they professionalized, and now they got grant money coming in. And so now it turned into like Compassionate News or something like that. But more recently, after this, and for people who are interested, this is in my second book, Piecemeal Protest. But after that book published, then they changed their name to Animal Outlook. So it's not even the name has anything to do with this radical stuff anymore.
This is a really kind of important movement issue that people need to understand in a way. I mean, like if you think about vegan outreach, and the co-founder Matt Ball said on an AI Zone podcast that I
cited in the book. Oh, it was a gem, Roger. Oh, that gem that you got out of him that made the book.
They regret having vegan in the title. They regret because it's not good for their fundraising.
Yep. Oh, was it that? Oh, it's one of my favorite quotes I got to put in that book.
It's ridiculous. And now the guy is saying eat chickens and not cows, I think is what he's saying.
Because
one step for animals. I mean, these are movement issues, which is, I mean, movement issues fascinate me, I know, but I mean, these are important in terms of our movement, really.
Corey, I was going to ask you on this whole professionalization thing, because I know you talk a lot about it in, you just mentioned Piecemeal Protest, but also in A Rational Approach to Animal Rights, and I think you've written articles on it as well. Do you think that as sort of organizations try to maybe survive within a capitalist system, and it's that sense of, right, we have to raise money in order to function, I mean, you described, and I maybe won't name names, I don't know if we're going to name names today, but you described one organization as being battle worn, and despite having a small small kind of radical start to their kind of organization, they become sort of characterized by non-confrontational moves because they're trying to gradually infiltrate consumer culture. And I just wonder, is that always inevitable, do you think, when organizations grow? And then also another question is there a place for that? Is there, as long as we have the radical side alongside that, is there still a place for that kind of gradual infiltration, do you think? Or is it just problematic?
That's hegemony. Wendy, that's a hegemony. They dominate the movement, and it becomes a sort of pipeline. It becomes a pipeline to where these radical groups, student groups, grassroots groups, not all, but many of them, and I'm sure you guys have worked with these folks as well. It's that you speak with them and they're like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and they schmooze with these people because they've been socialized from the beginning that this is the way you do activism. The bigger you get, the more wealthy you get, the more power you have. It's that economic logic of growth. But then there's folks like Roger's group, like that's been chugging along for a while and it has its place. But we also have to recognize that I'm not here to completely bash professionalized groups, because we do have to recognize that, the grassroots groups maybe don't have as much platform. They don't have as much sway, but they also get to say the messages that need to be said. And when Roger's out there every Saturday in Dublin, like, preaching to the people, like, somebody needs to hear that. They're not going to get it from the big charities. But yeah, I do think that that's the capitalist effect. And that was really one of my main aims for that book, is because I don't think that a lot of, and Roger and I have talked about this before, I don't think that the movement has a good sociological analysis of the broader structure that's going on here. We get stuck in the psychological stuff, but they don't think about what is the effect of this capitalist system that we live in, the ideology that we all have been socialized with on bigger is better, wealthier is better, and the compromises that are associated with that.
I mean, it's ridiculous that we as supposedly kind of revolutionaries in a way, we just adopt a corporate model, which is all hierarchical and all the rest of it, and gendered, and so it's counter-revolutionary for a start. One question, we don't want to really kind of, there was a little bit of a fallout from last week's session, but we don't want to prolong that. But I just wonder what your thoughts are, Corey, about the idea of professionalism within the grassroots. Because normally it's the mainstream groups that professionalize, and then they almost like use the grassroots as free labor. But there's also this idea of professionalization within the grassroots now. What do you think of that?
I don't know. Tell me, like, what, I mean, I'm thinking what the example comes to my mind is I'm in Canterbury. We don't have any of that. We have a student group on campus, but they don't really do anything active in town. But earlier this year, they're called WTF, and I can't remember what that stands for, but WTF, but they would go and they basically mimic the style where they go in the street and they hold the laptops and show slaughterhouse footage or whatever else. But it purported to be grassroots because they're soliciting students and things like that. We're meeting in the town and all that, but it was actually the guy who was organizing it was on a salary. And I went down and spoke to him, and I was like, what's the deal here? And it's just like, he's trying to hustle. He's just a hustle. He's trying to make a career for him. So that did worry me, because he's using these students who are just really desperate, really, to have some kind of mentorship and some recognition of the things that they're passionate about, some guidance, some leadership. But I don't know. You tell me, like, what's inspiring that question?
Well, I think my own idea about this is that people are confusing the word organized with professional.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people say, we can do this better and kind of organize it in a more kind of maybe a structured way, but also make it look better. And I think they then think that therefore means professional. I think it's just a kind of misuse of language in a sense. But I mean, like, if you do look at the definition of professional, it does kind of have that smell about it, but it really talks about, well, it's the people who get paid to do stuff. And then, of course, you've got the kind of entrepreneur type, influencer type element of the movement now. And I don't know whether they're seen as professionals, but they're certainly seen as paid and they're making a career out of it. So it's a little bit fuzzy, I think, the idea, but it gets thrown around,
Well, what worries me about that is that you have students who just really want to get out there and do something, and they need somebody to take leadership over the situation. But then you have these large nonprofits who come in and start basically grooming these young people. Like these are the people who would be more likely to be radical, more likely to tell it how it is. And then they come in and they start grooming them and giving them free T-shirts and Facebook groups and all this stuff. And then that gets kind of washed out. And I can remember from the beginning when I just started as an activist as a university student, we would have people like Erica Meyer who come in from Compassion Over Killing. Karen Davis is, used to be a lot more professionalized than she is now. She's taken on a much more radical turn. But they would come to the campus and like tell us like, here's what you do and here's how you do it, and groom us basically. And then you would try to have critical conversations, because when I was a university student, that's really when that abolitionist debate was taking off. But I couldn't have that conversation with the other students because they've been indoctrinated. And that's what worries me, is that they come in these spaces and they basically groom kids.
It's a kind of fascinating issue, really. But again, another movement issue. But there we go. I'm going to move the slides on because we need to move on from this in a sense. So we're up to the late 1800s now, and
back to Ireland. So George Bernard Shaw is mentioned. I still have his on vivisection book, which is quite interesting. Yeah, which is quite interesting. And then the Sunshine Vegetarian Dining Rooms. In fact, there is quite a lot of really interesting pictures at the end of your book, or throughout the book, Corey, and one of which I think is a menu from, I don't know if it's from this one, but it's from it's very early, probably a little bit later. I think it's from the college.
Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because like we do have this idea that, well, nothing happened back then, but of course it did. It did, but it's just that, I suppose the time span between them is more in the sense of the things. But then again, the documentation of it is difficult. Going back, whenever you think about the history of the movement, it gets very fuzzy when you're in the 1800s. Until you get to
Well, I think Ireland is quite unique in this regard because, and for people who don't know Irish history, Irish people didn't just lay down and take it. That they were resisting. They were resisting all throughout the colonization. But really, towards the late 1800s, that's when we started to see some serious. There had been mobilization, but this is like really like coming to a head. And so these vegetarian restaurants became these hotspots for nationalists to come and plot and plan. And in fact, they would be monitored. They'd be monitored by the police to make sure like who's in there doing what they're doing. And in fact, the proclamation, when they proclaimed independence, was signed in a vegetarian restaurant by a woman who was also a feminist, a suffragette. So these were radical spaces. And Ulysses was all by James Joyce. Also, you can read these themes, and he was writing about that era. He's writing about vegetarianism being aligned with this kind of revolutionary spirit. And so this is something we don't think about with Ireland. And really, the reason why I always have to tell this story. What really spurred me to write about this? At the time, I was dating a guy. I lived in Cork, and I was going to go visit him. And I was sitting in a bar with my brother, and this guy said, "Oh, you're going to Ireland, and you're a vegan." Oh, what are you going to do? All he eats is meat and potatoes over there. But I knew that wasn't true because my partner was vegan, and I've been to Ireland, and we eat all kinds of great stuff. I was like, wait, what? What is this? So I need to do some research. So we had the stereotype about Ireland, just shoving meat in our face. But in fact, there's this rich vegetarian history, and not just vegetarian plant-based. We're talking about political vegetarians, people who were nationalists, suffragettes, people who were anti-slavery. These major leaders in these Irish movements also recognized that vegetarianism and anti-vivisectionism was very important to that. And that history, I think, has been really erased or forgotten, if you will. But I think even just my favorite bit is that proclamation was signed in a feminist vegetarian restaurant. What more proof do you need that there's this amazing stuff happening?
What's the reason, do you think, that obviously the majority of people in Ireland are not aware of this past? Is it because history is written by the dominant groups and that shapes memory too?
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and I want to see what Roger thinks. What I think is, so like many parts of the world in that era, in that history, where there was like a lot of radicalism happening, and then this conservatism hits basically in the late 20s and 30s. That's what happened in Ireland. Ireland became independent, and this really intense conservatism hit Ireland. And what I think, really based on the work of AFCO and other anti-colonialist researchers, is that for so many centuries, Ireland had been oppressed based on them as the humans being animalized, and also based on animal agriculture. That was the main reason that Ireland was colonized, because of animal agriculture. So Irish people recognized that their oppression was really tied to this being animalized, to be lesser than. And you see this with other countries, like with India's, when they become independent, there's like, how do we become human? We separate ourselves from animals. We take our place in the hierarchy. We become dominant to other animals. But also Ireland was kind of following that path that had been laid by the British state for so many centuries. And so for them to become civilized, to become human, to become players in the world system, was to become dominant over other animals. And I think that's where a lot of that comes from. What do you think, Roger?
Yeah, I agree with that, and that chimes very well with the work of Frank Armstrong, who you quote in the book. And so he's an Irish vegan journalist and independent now, I believe. But he gave a talk for the VIP when we were doing our free weekly kind of we call it a mini course, and he gave a talk about that. You know, he was basically arguing that the English wanted really to try to create Ireland as a farm, really, for England. And so that meant that a lot of humans had to be, got rid of. So they ended up being, kind of part of the slave trade. Yep. And so I think a lot of that, in terms of, people understanding the kind of, oppression, and therefore, I think there's that, and I think there's I thought of some modern day issues that are relevant to that, but I slipped my mind now. But I definitely think that that's kind of really a big part of the story of Ireland, certainly.
It's interesting actually, because sorry, Corey, go ahead.
No, go.
I was interested to make the comparison in what we were just talking about before, the professionalization within the movement, and then even this kind of because I know in the book you said that Ireland could have gone one of two ways, and they chose to go down the way of the dominant paradigm and the following that hierarchical structure and oppression of other animals. And it seems like it's the same problem, in that you get kind of a situation where you could have resistance and a radical faction and kind of take yourself off into a different path and fight against the dominant system. But actually in both those cases, with Ireland and within the movement, professionalizing, it seems to be going down that same route. We're following the normative paradigm and the hierarchical structures as well. Seems.
No, that's what I was going to say. Very good point. Yeah, but also you got to take it easy on Ireland. It's a small country and had been under colonial rule for so many hundreds of years. But there were nationalist agitators, and when people were trying to decide, they're literally deciding, what will Ireland be? What will free Ireland be? The Republic be? There were people who were consciously aware that one of the reasons Ireland was so downtrodden was because of animal agriculture, because of the mass kind of kicking people off of their land, because, as Roger said, dumping them off into the slave trade. And so, and not only that, but there's also people who are food reformers who recognize that this British food system that had been imposed on Ireland was also really doing serious damage to people's health. There's malnutrition and so on and so forth. So there were people who were really, they were recognizing this is really detrimental. But they're, of course, in the bigger scheme of things, as a small country, they've been really oppressed for so long. They went with the path of least resistance, unfortunately. And now here we are, where Ireland is like beating all the greenhouse gas emission limits, and it's not able to get it under control, trying to continuously increase the amount of animal products that they're creating. The Board BS Food 2025 plan is outrageously out of touch with the reality of climate change, outrageously so. But the other point I wanted to bring up is that when we talk about Ireland being a land of meat and potatoes, that's not Ireland. In fact, the food history of Ireland has been surprisingly vegetarian and vegan friendly. And the Irish people, the indigenous food of Ireland, has been very, very much so plant-based. But we have this stereotype that we impose on them. And I think also that's part of that colonial legacy, to say, oh, these backward Irish people who just sit around and suck on meat and potatoes all day. I think that's the other reason why I think that they've been forgotten from the animal rights history, is that there's barbaric people over there in Ireland, these slower people down in Ireland.
It just shows you how difficult it is to kind of swim against the tide, doesn't it? The influences around us in the environment, politically, socially, are so powerful that we sometimes get pulled along. But one thing that struck me from the book, something you said, was that perfect conditions are not necessary before meaningful efforts for social justice can begin, and activists need only recognise and mobilise pre-existing values and traditions which already align with their goals. And that really struck me as something that
that's one of the aims of this book. Yeah, Wendy, like right now, veganism, I mean, I lived in Ireland, it's been a few years now, but even then it was like really becoming a thing. There was vegan restaurants in Cork. I mean, not Dublin, but Cork. You could go anywhere in the country and get vegan stuff. It's like, wow, this is happening. As the book was being published, TripAdvisor said that Dublin was the most vegan-friendly city in the whole world, sorry. So this is happening. But my fear is that this is going to be seen as, because Ireland is like a multicultural place where everybody comes to, it's going to be seen as an outsider thing. That's not at all what this is. In fact, this is Ireland's history, this plant-based history. And I think that if that can be remembered and acknowledged, that this is something that's indigenous to Ireland, I think that's where we need to go and move away from this old colonial BS of this making more and more animal products and doing all this horrible stuff to animals.
Yeah,
Something you mentioned in the book. Go ahead, Roger.
No, I remembered my modern day things, but I know you've been dying to get in now, so carry on.
Something you mentioned in the book is that as colonialism happens, there is also this civilizing process that happens, and because of this process, people are seen as other, as lesser, and they are also feminized and animalized. So, what's the relationship between colonialism, human oppression, and other animals' oppression?
Yeah, so this is something that Carol Adams has written a little bit about stereotypes about plant-based cultures and how they're feeble and they should be ruled and they're unable to rule themselves and they're weak, or the rice eaters of India, the potato eaters of Ireland. So this is an age-old thing that colonizers have used. But the other bit comes from AFCO, and it's one of the best things when I pulled this from her. We also have that other theorists who've talked about this, but AFCO brings in that animalization bit, where one of the more predictable things is when colonizers come in, one of the ways that they justify that colonization is that they aren't people, they aren't human, they're less than human. And in fact, with Irish people, it's like unfathomable today, because we stereotype Irish people as being like white, really pale and freckly. And I'm partially Irish heritage, so I can make fun of that. But that's white and freckly and very, very pale. But back then, they were literally seen as not white. They were literally seen as people of color. They were literally seen as, in fact, I've seen one source where they were seen as the missing link, so not even fully human. And even further back into the Tudor times, they were seen as the barbarous, savages over in this wilderness, because Ireland was not always this kind of rolling landscape. It was fully forested, and it was all knocked down for animal agriculture. So it was seen as this barbarous place where savages lived, and they needed to be civilized. And so what happens is then the process of civilization is to knock all that animalized bit out of them and make them more human. So they bring in these different rules. Well, here's how you interact with animals. Here's how you interact with food. Here's how we're going to manage your sexual relations, and all these sorts of things to delineate animals from humans. But that's basically that's the colonization project. You look across the board, they animalize the people that they're colonizing, and they claim that the reason that we're doing this is to civilize them but of course that's nothing to do with it. But from our perspective as animal studies scholars, we often see that it's not just that the humans are being animalized, it's that the colonization process itself is often predicated upon the expansion of speciesism. Those two things often go hand in hand. The animalization of the humans that are being colonized and the expansion of speciesism. And that, if people are interested, you can read more about that from the work of David Nybert.
So animality is just merely a label, isn't it, that
Right.
the dominant class basically used for
Right,
anyone
absolutely.
that they would deem less worthy. So
And,
one thing that I really, really love about this book and the work that you're doing, Corey, is and you mention it, and I think it probably really is part of your inspiration behind it as well. And I really love that you're doing this. Is that you're trying to bring other animals back into the history of what's happened in Ireland and in other places as well, and we were talking about this in relation to what Nella was telling us about in Greece and in Europe and the fires, is that other animals' stories are so invisibilized, they're not recorded, there's no data. And I know you mentioned that in your research, it was really difficult to find the things that you wanted to research and read about, because the data just isn't there, because it's their stories, their experiences, their agency, who they are is so invisibilized. And I just thank you for doing this kind of work to bring back, or to sort of, put some of their experiences back into kind of historical writings and how it shapes cultures and things like this.
But even when like you said, it's invisibilized. So the most I can do is speculate in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, those two modern examples of what we were talking about before, I remembered was that there was quite a shock really when in modern times you've got a lot of anti-immigration feelings in Ireland, and even kind of expressions of racism, and it's kind of like, what, I mean, like, since what we've gone through, how can that happen here, kind of thing. And in fact, there's a football ground just down the road from me, and there's big signs outside kind of going, racism in Ireland, no, it's not happening here, kind of thing. It's kind of like, surely we of all the people that, with our experience, surely we can't go that way type of attitude, So that's pretty good.
Okay. I'm thinking all the stories where I'm like, the song might be incorrect, but okay.
So we're in terms of our little thing. Well, we're getting all the way up to the 1990s, folks. So
hey, there we go.
Going back to the one before, actually, I love the top line where it says that Moira Henry, it was classed in.
Oh, bless her heart.
Yeah, the only vegan in Ireland in 1949, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, for people who have not read don't know what we're talking about, there's literally in the newspaper called "The Only Vegan in Ireland." Oh, Moira, you trooper! And it was a very interesting, a very short story that I found. I guess it's was it the Irish Times? Because the Irish Times now lets you search through their whole history. I think that's where I found it. But yeah, all she's doing is complaining about how they don't get as much stuff as they did in Britain. And all, she's like, we don't get any of that nut butter, nut meat. And I'm like, oh, God, it's rough times. Missing out on that nut butter. But yeah, it was tantalizing, wasn't it? Though tantalizing that all the way back then they had the only vegan in Ireland. And I would have loved. And one of the things that I did in Ireland, because it's such a small country, they have Roger, what it's called. It's a forum. What's it called? Everybody's a member in Ireland. It's like a chat forum, a forum. You post on it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Oh, goodness.
You don't mean indie media, do you?
No, it's like literally a forum, but because Ireland is so small, like half the country's a member of this. So you go on there and you can ask them all kinds of questions and share stuff. I went on there and I said, here's a list of all these different random people from history I dug up. Is anyone descended from them? Could anyone give you the information? I got no hits whatsoever. Like Jack McClelland, this vegan athlete celebrity in the 50s and 60s who drew more crowds to his swims than when JFK, John F. Kennedy, came to visit. So he did the swim of Galway Bay, and you can still see, if you Google it, you can find one video that exists. This beast of a man, this guy from Belfast, he used to be a boxer, and he was a full-on vegan, not just a plant-based vegan. He was an activist. He was active with the Vegan Society. He had his own vegan society in Northern Ireland. But this amazing person who did all this activist work and all this, like, I mean, this is back when in the 1950s and 60s, we didn't have the science to know that veganism, full-on veganism, was healthy. We didn't know. We were still learning about nutrients and stuff. And this amazing guy is doing all this feats in the name of veganism, completely lost to history. So yeah, Moira, Jack, I was trying to learn more about them on the forums, but unfortunately, if there's anybody watching this and you know any of these people, I would love to have more information.
Yeah.
What's amazing is that back then you could have this title in a newspaper, meaning that some people, at least some people, knew the meaning of the word vegan.
Yes, exactly.
And I'm thinking that many other countries in Europe, even in the 80s, the word vegan didn't mean anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot of, I went through all the Vegan Society's journals as well to see, what they were doing in Ireland. And they were quite active, of course, of Northern Ireland. But also they would do speaking tours and stuff throughout the Republic. But even so, like, that's just, that's lost. We don't have that history anymore. But obviously there were people in Ireland who were doing this work. But even before the Vegan Society, back in the 1880s, 90s and such, people were being active. They had collectives. They had these restaurants that were political powerhouses. People doing, creating a new country over vegan, vegetarian food. It's amazing to me.
Well, I think we've got just a couple of these. I think this is the last one, in fact. Yeah. Okay. So Irish-based Go Vegan World launches. I mean, you were making some interesting kind of movement points there. You were talking about professionalization and big groups and all that, and essentially the way they kind of muscle in, because they really did kind of try to not so much take over Go Vegan World, but they certainly were kind of trying to kind of get them to work with them, and they wanted to put their logos on all their
mooching off their success. Because this is the thing about grassroots groups, is they're not beholden to some funders or whatever, so they can say what they need to say. They're going to speak on behalf of animals. So Sandra Higgins with Go Vegan World says it like it is, and she doesn't hold back. And lo and behold, it works, because people need to hear the truth. And so now you have other organizations in Britain or whatever that are when that gets big in the news, and they start kind of latching onto it, which is kind of cruddy, I think. But maybe I think Roger, it'd be interesting for you to share your bit on why the nationals have not really taken off in Ireland like they have elsewhere, like in the US or the UK.
I think they tried to, and I don't think it's anything to do particularly with resistance from the grassroots or anything to some extent. I think it could be that what they were trying to do is kind of send people over from the English groups and have like an English branch,
that's ripe for new research, isn't it?
Yeah. So the NAVs tried that, for example, and there was they tried to kind of really kind of extend out and send a couple of kind of, waged people over. But I think it was thought that maybe the Irish population wasn't big enough to kind of fund and support. When I first came to Ireland, funny enough, one of the first things I did as an academic is I went round all the prime movers in the movement that I knew, and spoke to them. And there was only one group, which was the one that you mentioned here in 2015, Aaron. And their prime mover there, he wanted to be paid, and he wanted to be kind of the leader of the movement in Ireland, and he thought that everybody should kind of pay him. None of the other groups that I spoke to was thinking in those terms. They wanted to stay grassroots. They wanted to stay in a kind of network type thing, and they didn't really want a leadership kind of situation. So Aaron became like it was really a kind of a Peter kind of model thing. And sometimes interchangeable with Peter. So they went for all the kind of, I'd rather, be naked type stuff. And so they became very controversial within Ireland itself. They met a lot of resistance in the end from the grassroots. So I think that it just kind of doesn't really fly. The kind of professionalization, careerism in Ireland doesn't really kind of fly. And I think another interesting thing is kind of the image of that. I took part in a debate with Bruce Friedrich, and he was working for Peter at the time. I took part in a debate with him when we were both. I was lecturing at UCD, and he came as the kind of star of this debate type thing, and he really went down badly because. If you've ever seen pictures of Irish politicians, but they don't look like North American politicians, and yet Friedrich looked exactly like that, not a hair out of place, tan, teeth that would blind you and this kind of stuff, and he was just very kind of shiny and kind of professional, and he was very, but he sank like a stone because the Irish don't kind of really associate that with authenticity. They think,
right, well, interesting.
We want a real person, who's this plastic person on the stage kind of thing.
Oh, you want a Michael Higgins.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, hair and all that. So,
he's never seen a brush in his life. Interesting.
So before we close this down, I just want to point out that the most important part of this is this thing. If you can see my cursor moving, the Vegan Information Project forums in Dublin. So thank you for.
Oh, that's important.
Thanks for
it was
the name
writing the book just for that.
I'm here to verify the most important part of the timeline.
Right, so we can get rid of that.
Deb's got a question for Corey. Was Northern Ireland as a political geographic entity different from the rest of Ireland in regard to animal rights?
Yeah, I would say so. So I was mentioning earlier, Northern Ireland had a lot of activity from the Vegan Society, for instance. So yeah, basically a branch of England. So there was a lot going on there from the 1800s and on. Whereas in the Republic, like that, the Moira story, she was from the Republic, and there's a little bit more vague. There was some stuff happening in Dublin. But obviously in the Republic, there was a lot more, there was an intersection between nationalist politics, feminist politics, and anti-speciesist. So yeah, there's a little bit, certainly a little bit different there. But both of them were highly, highly active, both spaces.
I think we should comment on this, people. I didn't see this until just now. That's terrible.
All right, I'll put an addendum to the book to make sure everyone knows.
Yeah, Ronnie said right at the beginning when we were getting two of me saying what's going on, he said it's bad enough having one. So I think Ronnie's mic might get muted quite a lot on Thursday. We've got a fundraiser for Back into Daylight, which is the vegan sanctuary that just took in 200 hens. As promised, Corey, I wanted to ask you about it's the last words of the book, really, and you talked about Marxist theory and everything, and I've always wondered why people on the left don't see other animals as part of the proletariat, and there's a bit of a little bit about that in the kind of paragraphs that end your book. And do you have any kind of ideas about that?
It's a bunch of white dudes. What do you want? It's a bunch of white dudes. There's no actual critical understanding of hierarchies and inequalities. That's my theory, Roger, if I'm honest. I don't know. I mean, you have the same thing in every movement. There's like this there's like silos that people build and lack of intersections. But I would say there's such a lot of work coming out. For instance, I just got, what's his name? Foster is his last name. He just came out, The Return of Nature. I've got books I haven't had time to read yet, but there's people who've been reimagining Marx in a way that incorporates non-human animals and in the environment. So it's happening. It's happening. Well, we were in the book with David Nybert on capitalism, right? So, I mean, there's a big old group of us that were on there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
What do you think? Why? I think it's because a bunch of white dudes. I'm honest.
There is a large part of the movement that's critical to those who speak against capitalism. Would you say that, and they ask why liberation cannot happen under capitalism? Would you say that the answer is that I think you also mentioned somewhere in the book that oppression emerges from the mode of production a society adopts. Could you imagine any scenario in which liberation, human and non-human, would be possible under the current system?
Can you?
No, I can't. I have a limited imagination.
Let me think. I don't think so.
Well, we've learned something that Corey is expert at bouncing the question back at the person who asked.
You guys are asking me questions that have no answers. Come on. That's not fair.
So this is our plug for Thursday. So this is, I think it's the final. It's called Jailhouse Vegans for people who don't know, and we're featuring Back in the Daylight again because we just wanted vegan run sanctuaries, but because there's almost like an emergency situation with so many new residents that we thought we would try and get some money for that situation. So that's what that's all about from Ronnie. You talk about Brexit in the book as well. It's very up to date in that sense. You say that that's going to have some implications, Corey.
Yeah, I mean, it was right on the cusp. It was right on the cusp. Right. So last year is when the last revision went through. When I did the last read through. So Brexit had finally, because COVID kind of screwed it all up, right? But I don't know. Maybe you have more up to date. But I know one of the things that has happened is that there was the Irish food system was just like ground to a halt for a long time there because I would say, but it's not bizarre at all. It's predictable. So here we are all this time later, and Ireland still is so dependent on the UK for its economy. It's still an agricultural-based society. It's still dependent on this old colonial system, unfortunately. I don't know. Maybe you can update me on like what's new there. I know recently one of the things that they're trying to increase the amount of milk that's being produced, and all these I hate that name, bobby calves, and they're like shooting them and all this terrible stuff. But yeah, Brexit's been wreaking havoc. Yeah,
trying to open up markets in China and elsewhere, going to compensate. Yeah. You mentioned Brazil, I think, in the book. But I mean,
well, that was the British part. That was the British part. Britain's like British only beef. British only beef. It's like And there's always going to be people who can't afford the British only beef, so it's going to come from somewhere. It's going to be from
high quality. There's a bit of an ideological battle going on in terms of farming, though, between the two countries, in the sense that both have always. I mean, we know that a lot of farmers in all kind of countries do this, but in particular with Ireland and with Britain, there's been a tradition of claiming that they have the best welfare in the world, grass-fed, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a real kind of ideological battle in that sense. It's kind of, how can you give up this wonderful Irish product kind of thing? Yeah. And it is true that what we notice on the street, it is true that the mythology about Irish farming has gotten through to the extent that when people come as kind of visitors, they kind
it's a global product.
Yeah, surely it's a green and pleasant land, to borrow that phrase, but the kind of idea of intensive farming in Ireland, these kind of dairy carousels, artificial insemination, fur farms, that's a big shock to people. You see people outside the fur shops and they go, surely there's no fur farms, not in Ireland, can't be, type thing. So it goes to show that propaganda really kind of works in that sense. I know that strayed from the question a little bit, but yeah.
Well, I mean, that reminds me of Aldi's. Aldi's used to do this, like, the whole Buy Irish, Love Ireland campaign.
Still do.
Blew up. It was so successful. And they've done surveys now that shows that consumers in Ireland actively look for the Buy Irish, Love Ireland kind of campaign, the labeling. And it's just a marketing ploy. And if you actually look at the I don't know, the store documents or whatever, they're saying in there, oh, we've been able, because of Aldi and all these other stores, we've been able to increase the number of cows we purchase, increase the number of employees, expand our farms. It's like, this isn't doing anything to liberate other animals. It's only selling them alive so we can expand it further. And it's horrific. When I first came to Ireland, that was one of the things that struck me.
Yeah, but you go into any Irish Aldi, and there's these massive pictures on
Yes.
You know, and like I mean, Declan from back in the day, like, will know that the guy there proudly holding a chicken, you know, and a couple of eggs, you know, just lives down the road, and you know, there's a kind of, well, what is the reality behind these pictures kind of thing? It's total propaganda, you know. But then, you know, what advertising isn't, I suppose. So,
But can I give a shout to the other side of this? One of the things that has always impressed me about Ireland, and I reckon this is unique to Irish culture, but also the fact it's a smaller country, is that you would just be driving along, you'd turn the radio on, there'd be an animal rights debate. They'd be on mainstream radio debating circuses or something like that, or dogfighting or whatever, and it's out there. It's in the conversation. I'd be walking down some side street in Cork, like side street, not even a main street, and you see one of Sandra Higgins' big posters. This is unheard of anywhere else. I've never seen anything like that in the U.S. Never heard anything like that in the U.K., where it's just like the animal rights debate is out there. I think that is very unique to Ireland. Do you think so?
well, I mean, I guess what Sandra did was, I mean, it was Go Vegan Island at first, wasn't it? And so then they kind of expanded.
Well, when I first started going there, her group was only just getting started. And I mean, that's what I'm saying. We'd be driving and turn the radio on, and people would be calling in and hotly debating on things. I think there's this kind of that people have time for that debate, even if there's, the hegemony is still the species.
Yeah, it was really interesting. The first kind of media that Sandra did in Ireland was really interesting, because there was a big focus on where are you getting the money from. A lot of journalists wanted
I remember that.
Yeah. So I remember a conversation with Sandra, because there was one very famous one where it was a little bit like the kind of Jeremy Paxman thing with Howard, kind of asking the same question about 64 times, and this guy was just at it. Tell me about the money. Tell me about the money, and she wouldn't. And so I said to Sandra, you're going to have to find an answer to that you're happy with, because you're going to get asked that question, because it'll end up in a media spiral.
That's one of the reasons why I've been pushing with my book, is that this is not some outsider kind of encroachment. This is part of Irish history. This is indigenous to Ireland. There's this resistance in Ireland. There's this plant-based history in Ireland. But I've heard that interview where she was just being accosted based on that. Yeah,
she was really getting piled into. And then there was a TV one that she did, which we've analysed on the show. It must be a year ago now, people, where the interviewer or the person asking the questions, because Sandra was on the panel, we were in the audience at the time, and Sandra kept getting stopped because of her language. So she would talk about the residents at the sanctuary, and said, "Oh, can we just? You're talking about the animals' rights, and this kind of stuff." And then she talked about exploiting others. And when you mean others, you mean the animals. They were trying to do some kind of weird translation, as though the Irish population.
But to be fair, Sandra is one of the most eloquent women when it comes to using language that personifies animals and makes them persons. I've never met anyone who's been more fluid with that. But you're right. Yeah, it's just.
Just on a language point, Jeremy's made a point, which I think I don't know what your perspective on this would be, Corey.
I can't see.
So 709. From a language perspective, I can't help but think farming is a huge euphemism. Imagine calling a human Holocaust farming.
Yeah.
I can't find that. Hang on.
709.
I'm not being funny.
People started saying farmed animals. It's still,
it's like they're being farmed, and it is a very euphemistic term, isn't it, that we're using because we're so conditioned to use those terms. But actually, we wouldn't talk about farming humans, for sure.
To Roger's point, though, like Wendy, I nothing that I use I feel is fully perfect, and I spend a lot of time thinking about it. I'm like, oh, I have to do something. Got to get words on the page. But when I was doing my interview with the Dublin Museum, the guy who was brought in as my counterpoint, he was like, oh, you keep calling it flesh and scorched flesh and stuff. Well, what it is, but it's like he couldn't get past that.
Yeah, I know. It's really difficult, isn't it? Because we're trying to strike that balance of not completely alienating people from what we're saying, because we want to make political points, but we also want them to understand what we're saying and not just get stuck there. And yet we don't want to be reinforcing the speciesism in our language. It's really
Roger and I, the sociologists, we know the power of language to normalize or to disrupt. And I think one of David Nybert's books, and he at the beginning of the book, and I think David Nybert is like my hero when it comes to thinking critically about language. And at the beginning of the book, he says, it's going to be awkward. It's going to be some tongue twisters or whatever else, but this is important for disrupting the status quo and thinking critically about what really is happening here. And that's what we have to do. I mean, we just give our disclaimer and move on and speak the truth.
Yeah, but because I remember when we were doing the chapters for the book, Corey, that he wanted a particular style and make sure that words like meat were put in inverted commas and this kind of stuff.
Which I still do because of that. Yeah. He's taught me a lot of. Yeah. Oh, he's a genius of stuff.
Well, when I was doing my PhD, I struggled with the word pet, because it was the time when there was a move in the movement. Well, in the early 80s, there was a move to bring in the idea of companion animal. And then later there was the idea of companion animal is kind of giving them a job, whereas animal companion would be better to say. And in the end, I went back to calling them pets because of the fact that their property status, the fact that we can kill them. And there was a big debates going on in the vegan movement. Oh, I'm a cat mum, but they're not my slaves, I'm their slaves and everything. And I was thinking, well, it's interesting, that the slave can take the master down to the vet and get them killed. There's not many, so it's kind of, I mean, language is really kind of powerful in that sense, but it can be difficult and it shifts over time, as you say, and it can get you in hot water when you think, we were saying, weren't we, Wendy, that, you look back at things you wrote 10 years ago and you think, oh dear. So I think
even less, even like a few months or a year or
Roger, you definitely changed the name of your blog at one point, didn't you?
I did what?
You changed the name of your blog at one point.
Yes, I did. Yeah, that's right. And then rather than, I was getting a lot of flack about the non-human bit, I think. And so I put other sentient beings. And I think somebody's criticized me for that as well. And so you can't kind of win. But I'm a bit like you, actually, Corey. I don't really have time to do my blog anymore, really, to be honest. So I even forget about it.
Those were the days.
Yeah, when blogging was the thing. Yeah, the blogging was the thing. Well, we're 17 minutes past. So do we want to have any final questions, comments, observations?
Yes, please. Actually, Wendy and I had one, and I'll leave it to Wendy to phrase the question about the women in the movement and some tactics that have been adopted, and would like to have the feminist critique on that. So, Wendy, would you like to ask that one?
So I think thanks, Nella. It comes up a lot. And even last week we were talking about it on the show in terms of what might be looked at as sexist strategies in the movement. So we're talking about like the Go Naked campaigns, and it might not be with say the police if they do those. Yeah, that's it. That's what I was going to ask you. Do you? Because obviously some women will still using these tactics.
White ladies are empowered. Come on.
And I saw them. There were two women, stockings and suspenders, and the whole shebang with whatever. I can't remember what they were even protesting or something like that. But they will say, "It's my body, my choice. This is empowering." I just want to hear your perspectives on this.
Shut up. Well, let's think about this. I've actually, one of the first blogs I put on Vegan Feminist Network 8,000 years ago was about that. And one of PETA's reps came on there and said, "Oh, my body, my choice." Blah. But empowerment. Listen, fair enough. But let's look at the data here. Let's look at the sample of all the stuff y'all have produced. It's thin, white, young, able-bodied ladies. And that's what we got. It's not a diversity of people. They've also said men too. A couple of men thrown in there who have their shorts on or whatever. It's BS. What I think is happening, what I really think is happening is that you have a movement where you have a group of women, first off, socialized as women to be deeply empathetic and caring and nurturing and but young women, right? Not trying to be ageist here, but it's a little more impressionable, right? You're younger. And you enter this movement where this is the role that's put out for you. Your job, your expected role in this movement is to do this. So you have to think about this. When they're sitting around a table, and I don't know, PETA HQ, used to be Norfolk, wherever they are in DC, they're sitting around the table and think, we're going to do our next naked campaign. Who will we get? What will we do? They don't just kind of randomly pick somebody around the table and like, all right, what lovely little 20-year-old girls can we get out there to go take her clothes off? That's what it is. And then you have women who are growing up in a society where you can either be sexualized or be invisibilized. And when you're 19, 20, 21 years old, do you want to be invisible? No, these are people, when you're younger, like, it's all about being accepted and being part of something. So they're taking advantage. It's just like the porn industry. It's why the porn industry goes off after these young girls who either are going to be sexualized or be invisibilized. And who are younger, the brains aren't fully formed yet, and they're going to be easily groomed into this. That's what I think about it. I think it's BS that they think this is empowerment. If this is empowerment, I would see a whole diversity of people who would be engaged in these campaigns, which I do not. And they can trot up whatever they find, but I've been following them for 20 years. It's the same old thing. It's the same idealized body type. Off my soapbox.
And it goes back to what you were saying about the lack of sociology in the movement and the lack of structural analysis. But I've actually got an Irish example of exactly what you've just said, in the sense that when I was doing that research that I mentioned right at the beginning when I came to Ireland, the deal was that I kind of joined a demonstration for this group, and then I got to
You're naked.
Interview the leader, but they'd done something on Grafton Street, and I remember one of the comments in the papers. It said, "Well, if we're going to get naked women on the street because I ate a burger, I'm going to eat two." And and I was thinking, well, it's kind of not really engaging with the ethics of what's going on. And then on this march that I had to go on to get the interview, they were trying to get the same young woman to do it again. And she was saying how uncomfortable that she felt doing it. And yet it was kind of a lot of pressure. It was kind of, well, it's for the animals and all this kind of stuff. So you do get this idea about, volunteering. But, what's volunteering within patriarchy from a young woman's point of view, right? Absolutely. And so it was very painful to watch this process of kind of coercion going on. And I'd never forgotten that. And I was thinking, this is just like cruel and terrible, because it was kind of like, well, it's for the animals, so you've got to do it, kind of thing.
And if you criticize it, why don't you put the animals first? The animals have to come first. Oh, that classic, like taking advantage of women always putting others first. So don't you dare criticize it. Yeah.
And also, what other social justice?
Ronnie, I don't even believe that. Do you? Apart from it being a
what? No.
Ronnie would do anything.
He's always talking about going naked, aren't you, Ronnie? Yeah, but what other social justice movement would you be required to go naked for and be taken seriously as well? That's one thing that really concerns me about that whole thing as well. Yeah. So,
and may I cite a study that was done a few years ago. It was done in Australia, but it's a social psychology study where they went and engaged the people who were watching it. It was a classic Go Naked campaign, PETA style stuff. And it turns out that the men who were seeing that recognized that this was objectification. They were so turned off by that, and props to them. They were so turned off by that. They didn't even understand what the message was. So when they were kind of queried on what's the message that was trying to get across, They didn't even get the animal rights message. All they knew was these women are out here being exploited. So it doesn't even work. There's not even science to back up that this works. But if you ask PETA, what does PETA say? Sex sells. What does it really sell? This is like they can put in their glossy little fundraising or, end of year annual report so they can garner more whatever. I mean, that's all it is. It's not based on research.
Although there is a comment which is interesting here, because I've noticed a bit of a shift with PETA of recent times. They're not doing so many of the outrageous things that they were kind of famous for, and I think that
well, maybe because Me Too happened and they realized they can't get away with it anymore.
Yeah, maybe it was that, and they didn't seem to repeat the Ku Klux Klan thing very often, and I think that was because of the backlash there, which goes to show that reflexivity in the social movement is important. So the idea that if they're doing it for the animals, don't criticize it. I mean, the idea is well, actually, kind of reflexivity in the social movement is a good thing.
Yes,
isn't it?
Yeah, I'm telling you, I'm a contrarian, and like people know me from always critiquing everything. But I tell you what, one of the things that I found in my second book, really chronicled 40 years of social movement literature, or our social movement literature. And all that was about factionalism and debates and criticism and people not getting along. At the end of the day, after I followed 40 years of this, what I did see is that these organizations actually started to listen and did start to respond and did start to change their tactics, if only a little bit. So it does matter. The problem is you got to put yourself out there, and nobody wants to be beaten up or talked down to or abused or whatever, blocked and ostracized.
Well,
but it does happen.
Well, it's difficult though. I mean, speaking as the only man on this panel, I mean, it's difficult for a man to say something, and say, well, you make a sociological point about, patriarchy or whatever. Oh, you're just a guy telling us women what to do, and we want to do it. Going back to what Wendy said, a lot of people will claim that it was their decision alone, and they wanted to do it, and all the rest of it. And that then takes a structural analysis to kind of deconstruct that, which we don't get in the movement, really. So, Ooh.
I have a final question. You have a conference coming on autumn, I think.
Yes.
The vegan sociology one. So, would you like to tell us a little about vegan sociology and
how awesome it's going to be? Yeah, thank you. Oh, Nella, you'd star. Yeah, so this is going to be the second annual conference. It's going to be weekend of the 8th or the 9th, 8th and 9th, I think. And this is very exciting because this is our second one. But what we've done this year is that we have all the animal groups of all the official sociological associations presenting a panel. And then we also have individual sociologists in their own panel. So the Polish Animal Society group, the American one, the British one, the Canadian one, the Australian one. But basically what this came out of was during COVID, at that time I was the chair of the Animals and Society section of the American Sociological Association. And I sent a letter to the listserv, and I said, listen, you guys, this is it, man. This comes out of speciesism. And this is our time as sociologists to do something. And this is what I did. I signed it off with, the time to go vegan is now. Ooh, shouldn't have done that. People wrote back, oh, is this a vegan group now? Is this a vegan group now? I was like, for Pete's sake. And I was just so frustrated. It was like, really? Like, come on. And David Nybert and others had founded that group 20 years ago. It's like, we still can't get to that radical bit. And so me and my co-founder, Zoe Sutton, who is Australian, we started this, and it's just a grassroots collective. But we're going to do an annual conference each year. So we did a conference last year. We're doing our second one this year. And the registration is completely free. You can go to vegansociology.com. And we would love for you to be there. And we were very, very student friendly. So yeah, I mean, that's it. We were just kind of fed up with the people who just weren't willing to take a risk, and people who are not just not vegan, but anti-vegan, who are in these animal groups in the sociology. And saying, I think it's time to create kind of a global space for us.
Well, to bring all this full circle, I'm looking forward to the Irish panel in that conference.
Are you making us one? Are you gonna organize one?
Right. Well, Well, I think this has been great, and we've got some great comments too, saying that people have enjoyed the chat. So that's
yeah,
good.
it's been really, really interesting. Yeah,
We
thank
have
you,
an
Corey.
announcement about your holiday, Wendy.
Oh, do we? Well, it was a late birthday present, and I'm going to Bonnie, Scotland next week to stay in a vegan hotel, which is amazing. So we decided to take a little week off the show, didn't we? We decided to slack off next week, so we have no show. Oh yeah, yeah, definitely.
Come with you.
We're all going, aren't we, Wendy?
You're all invited. I hope you're all coming. Yeah. Excellent. That would be great fun. No, that would be actually great fun. So yeah, we've no show next week, but I will be thinking of all of you while I tuck into some amazing vegan-friendly, animal-free food in a vegan hotel. I can't believe it. A whole hotel.
We'll be thinking about you. Going, that Wendy, she's gone and abandoned us. So Jeremy the Yates, so you can use the slot next week if you want.
Right. Thanks, Deb. Deb said to have fun. So yeah, thanks, Deb.
And also that's willing to carry the luggage apparently. Yeah. So this pandemic has obviously got to people because they're not getting out enough, obviously. So right. So thanks very much, everybody, for tuning in, and we shall see you in 2 weeks' time. Wendy will send each and every one of you a postcard.
And a vegan treat.
Do people send postcards anymore? I mean, are they still a thing?
Oh, really?
I do.
Oh, you do? Right.
It was always really nice to get postcards, wasn't it?
Yeah, I do.
When was the last time you sent a postcard, Nella and Wendy?
I haven't been anywhere.
As a kid, I mean, and as a young person, I was very excited about sending and receiving postcards. It was really nice. The picture and then the couple of phrases. It was great. We don't do that anymore. We just send an email.
You always used to mention the weather. I don't know if everyone did that. Like, oh, it's been really lovely weather. Oh, it's been raining today. And he always talked about the weather really randomly. Oh, when he says I can eat vegan haggis.
I think I sent the last one 20 years ago.
I can't remember. I can't remember the last time. I think the last time I received one was when I was in prison. It was that long ago. So, okay. So on that note, we shall don't forget the thing. The fundraiser on Thursday, people. Well, while Wendy is trekking up to Scotland,
and I'm trekking in Bonnie, Scotland. Oh, and am I allowed to say this? Am I allowed to say that if anyone wants to hear more from Corey, I'm going to be chatting to Corey for the podcast next month. So watch out for that one, and we'll delve deeper. I know.
That's disgrace, blatant advertising. So don't forget the fundraiser on Thursday, people.
And Thrive Vegan World.
In Thrive Vegan World. So, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Corey. Thanks, everyone.